I'm Ella, and I'm 29 years old. The night my apartment complex burned down, my family didn't call 911, they set up ring lights. I was standing barefoot on the asphalt, watching the flames lick the server rack that held my life's work, when I saw the fire truck trying to turn the corner. It couldn't. My mother's G-Wagon and my sister's Range Rover were parked diagonally across the hydrant zone, blocking the street. They weren't panicking. They were posing. My sister Ashley was live streaming the tragedy with a tear filter on, shouting, "Guys, we're losing everything!" While my father, Ronald, screamed at a firefighter for scratching his paint job. They looked at me, covered in soot, and didn't ask if I was hurt. My father just sneered. "Great. Now who's going to fix the Wi-Fi at the compound?" That was the moment the daughter died. And the architect was born. I didn't scream. I just pulled out my phone, snapped one photo of their license plates blocking the hydrant, and walked into the darkness. Before I tell you how I turned their greed into a federal prison sentence, tell me in the comments, what's the most selfish thing a family member has ever done to you? I'm reading everything. I didn't go to a hotel that night. I went to my secure off-site workspace, a windowless server room I rented downtown that hummed with the sound of cooling fans. My family thinks I'm just tech support, the girl who reboots their routers and sets up their printers. They don't know I'm a cybersecurity architect for Fortune 500 banks. I hunt hackers for a living. I find the cracks in digital fortresses that no one else can see. And that night, while the smell of smoke was still clinging to my hair, I realized my family's entire life was just one big, unpatched vulnerability. I sat down at my terminal and initiated Protocol Zero. I didn't attack them. I helped them. That's the beauty of a perfect trap. The victim has to walk into it willingly. For years, my father had been terrified of an IRS audit regarding his off-book real estate deals. He'd been begging me for months to find a digital way to protect the family estate, the Whitmore compound, from government seizure. He wanted to hide his assets. So, I gave him exactly what he asked for. I opened my laptop and drafted the legal paperwork for a blind trust and a generic shell company. It was a standard asset protection structure, with one fatal flaw for him. To hide the assets effectively, the ownership had to be transferred completely out of his name. The deed to the mansion, the title to the land, it all had to be signed over to a corporate entity. And the sole trustee of that entity? Me. 2 days later, I met them for brunch. I was still wearing borrowed clothes that smelled like a thrift store. And my mother, Cynthia, wrinkled her nose when I sat down. "You could have at least showered," she said, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. "We have an image to maintain, Ella." I didn't snap back. I just slid the thick stack of documents across the marble table. "I did it," I said, keeping my voice flat and exhausted. "The house is safe. The IRS can't touch it. I set up the corporate shield you wanted. You just need to sign here, here, and here." Ronald's eyes lit up with greed. He didn't read the clauses about the irrevocable nature of the trust. He didn't read the section defining the trustee's absolute power over the property. He just saw the words, tax exemption, and asset protection. He grabbed my pen and signed his name with a flourish. "Finally," he said, blowing on the ink. "I knew you'd make yourself useful eventually. Now, go get cleaned up. You look like a disaster." My mother smiled that shark smile of hers, the one she used right before she destroyed a waiter or a sales clerk. They clinked their mimosa glasses, toasting to their own cleverness. They thought I had just saved their fortune. They didn't realize they had just signed their eviction notice. I didn't cut them off. I owned them. 2 weeks later, I walked into the Whitmore compound for my sister Ashley's engagement party. It was a $200,000 affair, paid for entirely by the tax savings I had engineered. The lawn was covered in white tents. There were ice sculptures dripping in the Texas heat, and a string quartet was playing pop covers near the pool. I wasn't wearing a gown. I was wearing slacks and a blouse I'd bought on clearance, carrying nothing but a single silver USB drive in my pocket. I found my father holding court by the bar, laughing with a group of property developers about how he'd outsmarted the system. I walked right up to him, interrupting his punchline. "Here," I said, pressing the cold metal of the USB drive into his palm. "These are the access codes to the trust. I've set up the automated ledger. I'm resigning as the trustee, effective immediately. It's your mess now." I turned to walk away. The air tasted sweet with the adrenaline of finally quitting. I made it 5 steps before the music stopped. I didn't make it to the door. 2 private security guards, men with earpieces and necks thick with muscle, stepped in front of the exit, blocking my path. I turned around to see Ronald's face. It had gone from smug to a deep, violent shade of purple. "Grab her!" he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. My mother rushed forward, gripping my arm with nails that felt like talons. You think you can steal from us and just walk away? She hissed, loud enough for half the party to hear. I didn't steal anything, I said, my voice steady, though my pulse was hammering against my throat. The accounts are empty, Ella, Ronald shouted. I tried to transfer the operating cash this morning to pay the caterers. It's gone. Zero balance. You hacked us. He hadn't read the trust documents. Of course he hadn't. The money wasn't gone. It was escrowed, locked in a holding account that required dual authentication until I released it. But he didn't care about the mechanics. He only cared that he had lost control. He signaled to a man standing in the corner, a guy in a cheap gray suit who looked out of place among the tuxedos. The man walked over and shoved a stack of papers into my chest. You're being sued, Ronald spat, stepping into my personal space. Embezzlement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and until the investigation is over, I've obtained an emergency injunction, freezing your personal bank accounts and seizing your passport. I stood there, trapped in the middle of a party thrown with dirty money, while my father used the legal system to put a leash around my neck. And in that moment, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. For years, I wondered why they kept me around if they hated me so much. Why invite the tech girl who wore thrift store clothes to their glamorous events? Why keep the daughter they called a failure? I looked at Ronald, sweating and screaming, and I realized I wasn't a black sheep. I was a liability sponge. They didn't keep me around for love, or even for abuse. They kept me around to absorb the risks they were too cowardly to take themselves. I was the designated fall guy. I was the one whose name was on the paperwork, whose credit score was leveraged, whose life was designed to be the collateral damage when their greed finally caught up with them. They hadn't just framed me for theft. They had been grooming me to go to prison for them since I was 18. The security guards dragged me into the industrial kitchen, away from the guests and the champagne. They sat me on a stainless steel prep table, standing over me with their arms crossed like I was a flight risk. One of them, a guy with a buzz cut, muttered something about ungrateful kids into his radio. He didn't know the story. He just saw a girl in cheap clothes who had upset the rich man in the tuxedo. I sat there, swinging my legs, and suddenly I was 19 years old again. I remembered the day Ronald drove me to a bank branch 3 towns over. I was a sophomore in college, eating ramen to save money, and he told me he needed a cosigner for a small business loan to expand his development firm. He said it was just a formality. He said it would help build my credit. I signed where he pointed because I still believed fathers protected their daughters. 6 months later, debt collectors were calling my dorm room. He hadn't used the money for the business. He'd bought a boat he named the Cynthia. He defaulted on the payments, torched my credit score before I could even legally drink, and told me it was a good lesson in financial responsibility. They broke me then. But sitting on that metal table, watching the guards check their watches, I almost laughed. They thought they had cornered that same scared 19-year-old. They forgot they were dealing with a woman who hunts state-sponsored hackers for a living. For the last decade, I had been the invisible mechanic of their lives. Ella, fix the Wi-Fi. Ella, wipe this hard drive before I sell the laptop. Ella, how do I permanently delete these text messages? They treated me like a utility, like a toaster or a router. You don't thank a router for working, you just kick it when it stops. They assumed that because I stared at screens all day, I didn't have feelings. They assumed I wasn't paying attention. But here is the thing about machines. They record everything. Ronald was out there right now, probably smoothing things over with the guests, telling them I was mentally unstable, terrified that I had stolen his money. He thought his emergency injunction was a masterstroke. He thought freezing the accounts and seizing my passport was the checkmate. He was wrong. When I built the trust's digital architecture, I didn't just secure the money. I installed a tripwire. I knew Ronald. I knew that the moment he couldn't access the cash, he would try to force his way in. He would try to override the protocols, just like he did this morning when he tried to transfer the operating capital. By filing that lawsuit and claiming fraud to freeze the assets, he had officially put the accounts on the radar of the banking regulators. But the system I built had a secondary trigger. Every time an unauthorized user like Ronald tried to bypass the dual authentication lock, the system didn't just block him. It logged the attempt as a suspicious activity report and automatically drafted a memo to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. He thought he was locking me out. In reality, he was ringing the dinner bell for the feds. He was digging his own grave with a golden shovel. And I was just sitting in the kitchen, waiting for him to hit the bottom. I walked out of the service entrance of the Whitmore compound with a lawsuit in my hand and $0 in my bank account. The emergency injunction had already hit the banking servers. My credit cards were declined before I even reached the street. Ronald thought he had stripped me naked. He thought that without money, I was powerless. But he forgot that I built my career in the shadows. I didn't need a platinum card to survive. I just needed a connection. I walked 3 miles to a 24-hour internet cafe in the University District. It was a neon-lit cave filled with gamers shouting into headsets and students chugging energy drinks. I paid for a terminal with the $20 bill I kept taped inside my phone case. I sat down in the corner, pulled up a command prompt, and went to work. My personal laptop was compromised. I assumed Ronald had seized it or was monitoring it. But the shadow server I had linked to the family trust was cloud-based and invisible. It was my fail-safe. I logged in, bypassed the security protocols I had written myself, and watched the screen fill with data. It was a digital bloodbath. I could see Ronald's digital footprint lighting up the monitor in real time. He was frantic. The moment he realized the trust money was locked, he had started moving assets from his hidden crypto wallets. This was money laundered from shoddy construction projects, the dirty cash he had been hiding from the IRS for a decade. He was trying to liquidate everything to cover the debts he owed to dangerous people. I watched the transfers pinging off servers in the Cayman Islands and Malta. He was bleeding out, and he was desperate. But desperation makes people sloppy. I ran a search on his encrypted messaging app. I had cloned his phone's SIM card digitally 6 months ago, when he asked me to fix his battery life. I never used it until now. I scrolled through the logs, looking for his next move. And then, I saw it. A text message sent 10 minutes ago to a number listed only as Fixer. The liquidity is gone. The house is a liability now. The insurance policy is worth $2 million. Do it tonight or tomorrow. Make it look like an electrical failure in the server room. We'll blame it on Ella's previous wiring work. I stared at the glowing text on the screen, the neon light of the cafe reflecting in my eyes. He wasn't just trying to frame me for theft. He was going to burn down the Whitmore compound. He was going to commit arson, claim a $2 million insurance payout to save his skin, and send me to prison for faulty workmanship that led to a catastrophic fire. He was planning to burn my reputation to ash just like he watched my apartment burn. My finger hovered over the print key. I could call the police right now. I could show them the text. I could stop the fire before it started, but I pulled my hand back. Stopping him then would have meant nothing. It was just a text, easy to deny, joke away, or blame on a hack. With his lawyers, intent would never stick. To end the threat for good, I needed something irreversible. I needed Ash. So I didn't call the police or warn anyone. I wiped my trail, stepped into the night, and let him strike the match. 3 days later, at 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with a scanner alert tied to the Whitmore address. Structure fire. Multiple units responding. He went through with it. I drove straight there. The mansion was fully ablaze, flames devouring the roof as firefighters fought a losing battle. Ronald stood near an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, already performing. When he saw me, calculation flashed, then the mask snapped on. "She did it," he shouted, pointing at me. "My daughter threatened to burn us down." The detective approached. Ronald kept going, wiring, tech skills, trust disputes. Then came the text. "I'll burn it all down." My number. Spoofed or altered, it didn't matter. The story fit. The house was destroying the proof. Servers, logs, everything melting into nothing. I was cuffed. Ronald watched, silent now, satisfied. Hours later, exhausted and dismissed as paranoid, the door finally opened not for a detective, but an insurance fraud investigator. "Your father filed a $2 million claim," he said. "Sole owner." That changed everything. I slid a thin blue folder across the table. Inside was the trust deed signed months earlier. Ronald had transferred ownership to hide assets. "I'm the trustee," I said. That house was mine. The room went cold. No ownership meant no insurable interest. The policy was void. Worse, Ronald hadn't burned his house. He burned mine. That was first-degree arson. Minutes later, they arrested him instead. He screamed that he paid for everything. "Not on paper," I whispered. "You hid it too well." The fallout was complete. Without insurance, with fraud and laundering charges piling up, the empire vanished. Assets seized. My mother indicted. My sister disappeared from the internet. The fire cleared the land. I sold it, paid my debts, bought a quiet home, and funded scholarships for girls in cybersecurity. That night, a collect call lit up my phone. I silenced it. Then I deleted the last ledger, the record of every lie. The screen went black. The debt was paid.